I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. Being aware of our many global predicaments doesn't make life any easier, perhaps just more true. Welcome our guest, Susan Olshuff, who shares her lifetime of service as a spiritual practice. Susan Olshuff. I'm particularly happy to be speaking with our guest today, Susan Olshuff, who is here on this particular special series of collapse-aware parenting, which we call Take My Hand, Conscious Parenting in Times of Stolen Dreams. This series is really taking on a life of its own. It really appears to me to be a conversation whose time has come, meaning that it's just not offered much in the world. That tends to be a pretty lonely conversation for just a human being in this world to be aware of various elements of collapse of Earth and human systems occurring now. All right. Thank you for your patience with that. I appreciate it.
No worries.
So it seems to me and us who are involved with the creation of this conscious parenting project that it's tough enough being an adult in this world, or for that matter, a child in this world, and being aware of the various aspects of collapse of Earth and human systems that we are in the midst of now, and the even larger waves that appear imminent. It can be a very lonely place to be aware of those things, and then to try and find some sort of camaraderie, some sort of safe environment in which to have conversations about this, which seems to me to be the most important conversation in human history, because people just don't want to talk about it. You know, we just don't want to know about the effects of our human operating system on this miraculous planet we live on. And the real purpose of us putting together this Take My Hand conscious parenting project of interviews, series of interviews, is that oftentimes to be a parent and have that level of awareness can be even more lonely still. So Susan and I have had a chance to meet one another in an earlier call, and Susan, we were connected by a member of the production team here in this series, and it seems to be going that way, that each person seems to know someone else who might value, you know, being a part of this conversation, and out it ripples. And I so appreciate our earlier conversation to get us just a sense of all that is on your plate as not only a parent but a grandparent. And I know that this is not a usual format for you, this speaking and podcast and interview and so on, especially about such personal topics. And so for that, I really thank you for being willing to kind of step into the mystery of this conversation, and invite you to do what you did so well in our earlier introduction call, which is just share what you are willing and comfortable sharing about your very full plate in life, and anything that you would like to share from your own heart and your own experience about how the world is different now than when you were a child and you were looking up to your parents and grandparents. And so, Susan Olshuff, thank you so much, and welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited about this little journey we'll take together.
Yeah. Would you mind starting by saying a little bit about what you were taught as you were growing up, what it meant to be an adult growing up in this culture or in the culture you grew up in, and then what did it mean to be a parent? Could you say a little bit about that?
Sure. The truth is that when I look back from where I sit now, I realize how unconscious I was as a child and how unconscious my mother was as a young mother. My father died when I was 5, leaving my young mother with me and 2 younger sisters. We were 1, 3, and 5. So it's quite a tall task for a young woman to take on, being a single parent, grieving for the love of her life in a stage when their marriage was still very new. I don't think she ever recovered from that her whole life. So our home life was, I would say, in looking back, she was depressed all the time and poured herself into her daughters, to making ends meet in a very low income kind of way. And as such, I don't think I really thought very much as a child about what was supposed to happen. I knew what my mother was dealing with, and I tried to be the good big daughter and the big sister. And I think just imbibed from the greater culture, that you grow up, you do well in school, and you go to college if you can. And in our case, I would need to get scholarships. And then you probably get married and get a job and have kids. And that's what life was all about. My mother was very much in survival mode inside of herself. So I didn't have any role models of people who were deeply looking into what does it mean to be alive. But there was a lot of love and care and aunts and uncles and people who helped her out. And I don't remember feeling unloved at any point. But I don't remember as a young child having any great aspirations beyond what everybody in the projects did. We lived in the projects with all veteran families. And it was a simple, straightforward life. But when I was a teenager, I started wondering if that's all there was. As teenagers often start questioning things. And I remember looking at the stars and feeling so small and wondering what life is and having no guidelines, no inspiration. But it was a question that led when I graduated high school and did a cross-country trip with a best friend, sitting in fields with flowers in the western state parks or national parks, and still wondering, it's like I always felt separate. It was like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. But I was aware of always feeling separate from what I was seeing. And I didn't even know if it was a real question because I had never heard anybody thinking that way. So fast forward, I get into college, not really ready for anything academic, not even ready for, the student strikes during Vietnam. I was kind of, honestly speaking, quite oblivious to the world around me. Until a few years later, had an experience with drugs where my eyes opened, and the experience was such that I knew it wasn't just hallucination on drugs. I knew it was reality. And from there, things start happening, and Alan Watts' book finds its way into my hands, and then Ram Dass, and one thing after another in those years started making me understand that I wasn't the only one with these questions, these big questions, and that there were people who thought about these things a lot and taught about them and spoke about them, and there were ways to get engaged with that. So one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was doing transcendental meditation and going to Naropa University the first summer it opened. And little by little, the heart started opening and the questions got bigger, and a few answers popped into awareness. And by the time I got married and had my two sons, I had done 7 or 8 years of very full-on Vipassana meditation, and had done 3-month retreats of silence and spent months and months at retreat centers. But it still, even after, I think it was 7.5 years, I still felt like it was outside myself. I was kind of in the ballpark, but not really playing ball in a way. And having young children, just doing the best I could with the knowledge that I had, and trying to be mindful of as I changed diapers, and mindful as I fed the kids, and as loving as I could be. But it's really only having grandchildren now that I can look back and see how uninformed by any of the depth that I was beginning to peek into, how uninformed my life really was. As I respond to my grandchildren and I think of how I responded to my kids, it was a completely different universe of experience from what I'm seeing now. Now I have 3 grandchildren, 3, 7, and 12. And it's an exciting time because I feel like I can bring so much more of who I really am and what is really going on in a much deeper way than I had the opportunity to do when my own children were young.
Thank you. You actually started to go in the direction of my next question, which is, what are you seeing as some of the bigger differences between your early years as a parent and now, as you see your own children having their children, and you're interacting extensively with both generations, and having the level of awareness that you have about what's going on in this world? I'm curious, what are some of the larger differences that you see and experience? And I'm also curious, are your own children, as parents, are they on a similar wavelength as you are about what's going on in the world?
Well, to answer that last question first, my older son, the one with the 3 children, is very much in survival mode. The oldest child is a special needs child with pretty intense needs and constant medical attention, and it's a hard life. And he and his wife, I think, are doing extraordinarily well with the intensity that they've been given. But there's not a lot of room for anything other than getting the meals on the table, doing the shopping, getting the kids to school on time, and the whole thing. My son works for a solar company. He's vice president of a solar company in Vermont. And he has a very responsible job, and they do very big solar systems. They've even installed solar in Bernie Sanders' house. So his major in college was environmental studies. So he knows what's going on, but he just doesn't have the headspace to grapple with it. So it's kind of like, well, okay, I'm doing my bit. I know it's not enough, but that's as far as I can go. I'll do it as well as I can, give it everything I've got. And I think in terms of how he's parenting, he wants his children, he feels that they're too young. So he doesn't really, I mean, they talk about saving energy and, you know, some of the recycling and things that you can do with a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. Um, but he's in some ways protecting them, and I can understand it, from the intensity that he knows to be real. So he and his wife both are making the decision to just keep going, give the children the most love and the most security that they can feel in their life, which, you know, personally, I feel is a wonderful thing to have that foundation for these kids. Um, but they don't bring some of the things that I can bring to that relationship. I meditate with all 3 of my grandchildren, and they love it. And I think they actually experience something very different from the busy lives that they're in, and they appreciate it, especially the 7-year-old who really loves it. He keeps asking me for another minute or another minute after our short meditations. My other son has no children. He's married. He's traveling around the country exploring. He knows what's going on, and he doesn't know quite what to do with it, like many his age. He's working in organic farming, consulting farmers and local produce, and helping companies survive at a time where it's challenging. He's a business coach, you know, and he justifies his life by saying, I'm helping small businesses, you know, who are doing the right thing by the earth, helping them grow and helping them maintain their bottom line. But I know he's concerned. We don't talk about it very often. Every once in a while, he'll invite a more serious conversation together where he's prepared to get depressed, because there's no easy answers. And he's at a point in his life where he's still experiencing life and traveling and enjoying and keeping the reality a little bit at bay. So for my part, I find I wish they were more real about this. And I feel my job is to let go and let them discover this in their own way, which at times I find really difficult because I want to just shake them and say, wake up, you know.
Yeah.
Especially around the 3 little grandchildren, when I think, you know, when I put them to sleep and lie with them at bedtime, sometimes I'll just cry myself to sleep with them, because especially the 7-year-old, you know, in 10 years, he'll be graduating high school. And he'll say things like, when I grow up, I want to be this, or I want to do that, or I want to travel, or, and, you know, in my heart of hearts, I you know, worry, you know, I don't want to discourage his dreams, and I don't want to encourage them. And it's an awkward moment in time where you want to give children the best you possibly can. And at the same time, you know that they're going to face challenges, you
Yeah.
know, at the minimum, challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's holding a lot, you know. I feel like it's holding a lot. It's biting my tongue at times when I want to say more.
Mm-hmm.
And then finding a way to trust something deeper in the relationships, that if I can help the children, like when my 7-year-old grandson, I talk about him a lot because the older boy is special needs, and he's very he's a unique little Buddha figure, but he doesn't interact in the same way. So when my 7-year-old is coming tomorrow to help with Thanksgiving, when he's here, he always wants to know, what are we doing next? And what are we doing next? And we play a game together where we talk about just letting it all happen and not knowing what we're going to do next until we see what we feel like doing or what needs to be done. And just in that exercise that we do together, I feel like it's a contribution to his development that, you know, he's not getting in school, and his parents are just one thing after another. No blame. I totally get it. That's how I am when I'm in their environment. Often it's like, we got to get lunch, we got to get the laundry done, you know. But when he's here and when we have time alone, he's curious. You know, there's a part of him that's very curious about how grandma sees things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of respect. And so there's a big impact, I feel. And I mean, time will tell. But when I feel frustrated that I can't really lay it all out for him because my son doesn't want me to yet, I have to trust that a human dynamic that's born of my own life learnings can have an impact on him in ways that he may not even realize for some time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You've mentioned a couple of times now various practices of what sounds like self-regulation practices that I'd like to come back to, but you covered a little ground a few moments ago that I'd like to just loop back for a moment. I'm curious, when you talk about being concerned about the future or these elements of our relationship with both Earth and human systems, and you feel concerned about not wanting to over promote a child's wanting to dream whatever their dreams are into this future that certainly I grew up with, this this notion that every generation is going to do better than the last, and you can be anything if you work hard enough, and so on. These kind of memes that showed up all along my my growing up years. I'm curious, when you are looking out at the world and you're describing that concern, could you mention a few of the larger elements of our world that really give you pause, that are really the ones that lean on you in a difficult way?
Right.
For some people, there are political or cultural concerns, and for others, there are obviously environmental concerns, and for still others, it's the fragility of the global economic system. I'm curious, which are the really heavy elements that you carry?
Right. That's a very good question. And I think there's some of all of those areas that are there. I mean, because my work is in the environmental field,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been very aware of climate change for a long time, that's probably first in front of my awareness when I just even think of Hurricane Irene and how these kids had to evacuate in Vermont. They had to evacuate their homes, and you know, just how unknown what's coming down the pike is on the level of mere survival. You know, the winds, the hurricanes, all that stuff. And you know, we probably live in New England in a place that's, you know, less vulnerable certainly than the coasts or the hurricane regions or whatever, but one never knows. But I also think of the refugees, the millions of refugees who are going to need places to live. And I look at the consciousness even in my own neighborhood, which is a very wealthy area. And there's homes that are, you know, the McMansions, as we call them here.
Mhm.
And, you know, mom, dad, and 2 kids live there for 3 weeks in the summer season, and the rest of the year they live somewhere else. And I look at those homes when I go for my walk, and I think, you know, 50 refugees could live in that house. There's 5 bathrooms in there. Um, but we're not talking about that. And, you know, the people who are talking about resilience are talking about, you know, moving the houses from the coast and building parks. But when I think of resilience, I'm thinking of the human lives that will be disturbed. And um, are we developing a new generation of human beings who are going to have the spirit, the heart, and the spirit and the will to respond to that in a way that will minimize the human suffering um, wherever the needs are.
Mhm.
Um, and then, you know, and then especially in these days politically, you know, there's deep concern about democracy and the best of what that has to offer. And you know, and there's some very real concerns about what's coming down the pike, you know, in the next year or so, if we don't find a big change moving. And that's not just in our country, it's around the world. And I just realized how much I've taken for granted, how much our generation has taken for granted, that not only that the next, you know, will be better off than our parents were, you know, but I see my own kids already aren't as free and independent and comfortable as I was. I mean, we traveled Europe on $5 a day.
Mhm.
You know, my son has to spend every single penny just to get a little vacation for his family. It's not easy. Everything is so tight, and he's doing well. I mean, he's one of the people who's doing relatively well. So, you know, I mean, I think the difference between how I look at all of this and how both my sons are when they look at all this, if they do really look it in the face, which I think is more rare moments. But in my sense, there's a deeper trust someplace in the mystery. And it's something that I don't feel that even though they grew up in a spiritual community and were surrounded by lots of love, and I don't think it stuck, especially as they became adults and had to deal with the nitty-gritty of life, um, and didn't have the leisure to do, you know, 7 years of meditation retreats to get to know themselves and to touch a deeper place within. So I look and I see a generation of young people who don't have the benefit that I had of that period of time of discovering, you know, another way to look at what's going on. That's not as materialistic. That's not materialistic at all. And I feel, you know, I feel a real pull to my grandchildren because my own kids are grown-ups now. They make their choices, and I can't, you know, I can jokingly say every once in a while to my son, I wish you'd meditate once a week. You're under so much stress. Stress isn't healthy for you. Please just go for a walk, you know, in nature, whatever. I can only say it lightly, and then he makes his choices. And with the little ones, I do have a close relationship with them, and I feel in a more subtle way and playful way, I'm able to convey something to them that I hope will help them as they grow up, to meet these challenges.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's I've got to tell you, it's very moving to speak with you and to hear your particular history. Um, Unfortunately, it's rare that I get to speak with someone who's got a substantial history of personal development, and particularly self-regulation, meaning the ability to uh, first experience directly and articulate the inner states that are both the preferred states and also the states that we all get bumped into. Either, you know, the folks that I learned about this stuff from talk about being bumped out the top, or the more anxiety producing and overstimulating side of our resilience zone, this more optimal state. And then the bottom side might be the more contracting or the more depression looking side of being bumped out of that optimal state. And so when you describe your years of practice of being able to, again, articulate and then obviously be able to move about at will, once you've been bumped out, you have some choices. When you've got that inner toolkit the way you do, you got some choices about bringing yourself back in a conscious way, back to that zone where you can return to having your wits about you and be a little bit more present, and maybe even a little sense of humor in the face of God knows what stress is showing up in your world. And I also hear you very consciously and in an age appropriate way and in a capacity appropriate way, you're introducing some of these self-regulation skills to your grandchildren, and perhaps a little bit less, unfortunately, with your children. But boy, I understand what it is to have a plate so full that you just literally can't imagine sitting down for 15 minutes. That just doesn't, it doesn't compute. Can you say a little bit more about what that's like, that sharing and with both your children and your grandchildren?
Well, I mean, with my son, he's the one I see very regularly. My other son is off traveling now, so we're very close. We have wonderful connection. But with the son that I see more often, I mean, it's a mix. It's a mix of frustration that somehow I wasn't able to bring more into his understanding when he was young, and that I don't have the skills to know how to reach him now amidst his crazy life. So there's some sadness around that. And at the same time, there's just there's been an increased recognition of the need to let him be his own person, and let my daughter-in-law be their own person, and let them find their own way. And I think that that's a deepening, an ever deepening approach to all of life that I'm finding, that no matter how much depth is already there, whatever I've learned or whatever, there's always further to go to let go, and to, it's like a deep acceptance, and without having to hold on to particular results, whether it's the result that my son would meditate, or it's the result that we're going to come up with a new energy that's going to save the planet. It's like when the context is big enough, it can hold everything. And that's the challenge, to not contract, whether it's a small family life, with children running all over you, or whether it's a country that seems out of control right now and struggling to find its feet, or whether it's a planet that really looks endangered, by all estimations. It's like, what is it to always be stretching into a bigger place, where, while on the one hand, one wants it to be different, one wants it to be better, one wants to do what you can to improve things. And at the same time, there's the space to let go and be curious about the unfolding of the cosmos through it all, through us all, through the families, through the earth, through the countries. it's hard to articulate because it feels like the edge of the known. I mean, it is the edge of the known. To imagine being light enough on one's feet and one's heart, to not get so thrown by whether it's the family problems, the illnesses, the deaths, whatever is coming our way.
Mhm.
The next election. It's like how to hold being terrified because we're all human and we care, and the space that says we're going to deal with it, whatever comes our way, that's going to be our next challenge, our next lessons to learn. And there's no guarantees. But I mean, I feel like that's the challenge I'm in the midst of, we're all in the midst of, is like how to hold it all. We're very human, and we're concerned, we're worried, we're anxious, and we fall prey to grief and anger and resentment and guilt. I mean, where have I been all my life? Why didn't I start this a lot earlier? There's so many human responses that are part of being alive right now. How to hold that and not judge myself because I didn't teach my kids better. I did the best I could, just like my son is doing the best he can. How to respect that and allow that, and at the same time forge forward with ever more consciousness to hold more and more of the whole, which includes it all. The good, the bad, and the ugly, it's all part of the whole.
Yeah.
And who knows where it's going? Who knows where we're going? And there are moments of feeling freaked out and, like there's nothing I can do that's enough, and there's other moments where, like one conversation where somebody opens their eyes and says, oh, that is important. I better get my energy out it this week. It's like, okay, that one bit of consciousness has just been evolved to do something that cares for the whole in their own particular way. So it's a juggling. It feels like it's a juggling act of allowing for our own humanity and frailty and aiming for the stars, and finding a way through that. It's a tall order, it's a tall order.
Yeah. You're reminding me of a quote from Joanna Macy, who, of course, is one of the main creator of the longest standing body of work to facilitate this kind of conversation, called The Work That Reconnects. And her quote that came to mind when you were talking was something along the lines of the heart that is broken open can contain the entire universe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you have anything to say, just on a very personal level, about keeping your heart open. Because the temptation, if I try for a moment to put myself in your shoes and all that you're holding with your children and their children, it's a lot. And the amount of awareness that you've had for quite a while now, it's a lot.
Right.
And the temptation in my brief moment of trying on your shoes is to want to somehow harden or insulate myself from feeling how intense the feelings can be sometimes. So I'm wondering if this sparks you to share anything.
Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, what comes to mind is an experience I had probably 20 years ago when I was first learning about climate change, and maybe even more. And I was sitting on a back porch meditating outside, and there was a big bush beside me, and a storm was coming in, and the wind started blowing, and the bush actually almost knocked me over because the wind, and it was a substantial bush, the wind actually pushed it against me. And I remember what I realized at that moment is that my fundamental belief till that moment was that nothing could get me, that life was solid, that the earth was solid, that there was a reliability to existence, and I was safe, and I grew up poor. I didn't have everything, but I always got what I needed, what I wanted, and life was very secure. And this experience was like a momentary hit of it's not like you think it is. It's like things could really change, and you're not impermanent, speaking to myself. And another experience some years later was in the big earthquake in San Francisco, when I was right downtown San Francisco, and I held my hand up to protect my face from glass that was flying out of buildings.
Mm.
And the experience was, don't be afraid. They're coming from someplace deep inside.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's okay. It's okay. And it wasn't okay. There was shattering glass all over the place. There were fires breaking out around me. It was pretty terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
But there was that depth that said, it's okay. And then, the experience of the drugs and the experience with the spiritual teacher and awakenings that have happened, I feel very fortunate in that, over the years, I've had many opportunities
Mm-hmm.
to let that reality of don't be afraid, it's okay, go very deeply. And I'm not saying that I'm free of freakouts here and there or losing my temper once in a while or whatever, but there are benefits to years of practice. And I feel very,
Yes.
very fortunate in that. And one of the things that concerns me is that our young people today are facing a world where they don't have time to spend 10 years going to India and meditating and doing all these things. They got to get it. They have to somehow be exposed in some deep way. Those who have the heart to open, the eyes to see. My own experience was it was a lot of hard work to not only have those experiences, but then realign and realign and realign and do the work that makes the essence of those truths to be how you see life. And I feel very lucky, very blessed. And there are many of us who have that, but so many more people need to find their way to that depth to be able to deal with what's coming, which is why I'm developing a program for youth that I want to, see if I can roll out to help all these young people who are having to become grown-ups overnight, the Gretas of the world. And, we're all human. We all have the same minds. We all operate in similar ways. And I feel like a real responsibility to find a way to share that without it needing to take a decade of spiritual work, because they're going to have to rise to the occasion sooner than that. And it would be wonderful to find out that we're all wrong and it's going to turn, but it's just, it's hard. I look at my kids, I mentor a lot of young people, and there's so many good intentions and passion, and there's burnout because they don't have the inner strength to carry them when it gets too frightening, or they don't have the relationship to the unknown or to fear. That I feel like we all need to strengthen those muscles so that fear is not something we have to shut down in the face of, and the unknown is not something we have to run away from, but we embrace that as this is our world. And okay, and my own spiritual practices over many, many years was very much about not knowing and wanting to know. being in that place between those two where you desperately want to know, but you're totally in the place where you recognize that we can't know. And I feel like that's a motto for our times, that nobody knows how to fix democracy. Nobody knows how to fix the planet. Nobody knows how to fix governments and health systems and all these things that need so much work. And when we allow ourselves to go into a place where we recognize that we just don't know. We have ideas, we have thoughts, we have conditionings that have come from our parents and our cultures and our traditions of different sorts. We think we know a lot about stuff, but if we're still for a little while and we get in touch with this sort of opening where all of our thoughts and ideas are just thoughts and ideas, and right now they don't seem to be enough for the magnitude of the moment. And if we can stay in that place without freaking out, I mean, we see kids, the suicide rates are outrageous, the opiate addictions are outrageous, the addictions to cell phones, obesity, they're milder versions, but it's how do we avoid the intensity of, we don't know how to fix this, we don't know what to do. And so we have a generation, you know, generalizing, of course, because there are wonderful young people stepping up and doing everything they can, but so many are terrified by what's in front of them and are just trying to avoid it at any cost. So finding a way to help people relate to fear and insecurity with a pause, with a moment of deep breath, with recognizing that we're all in this together, that nobody knows what the answer is right now, but the answers aren't going to come from putting together the pieces of our mind of everything we already know. We need to reach much deeper, much higher, and we need to do it together. And so that's the call I feel toward, you know, especially younger people, but also peers, just to take the time to share that perspective and invite others to it, because I feel maybe my generation needed 10 years to meditate, but right now maybe there's a way those of us who are in touch with it can convey that, as I'm sure you're finding with many of the people you're talking to. Some way of transmitting without being a guru, you know, but just transmitting a spaciousness of heart that allows someone to relax a little bit, and then together we can see what we can do. And we don't know where it's going to take us.
Yeah, really beautifully said. You've just done such a gorgeous job of mapping out how you see the world and some of the pieces in it, like some of the elements that make up personal practices that are essential, or at least extraordinarily useful at these times. Like you used a word that I use quite often, the pause. To know the art of the pause, how immensely powerful that can be as an intervention in business as usual, and to give just enough space for an entirely different state of being to show up in short order. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And obviously the mindfulness that you've been sharing with us, you know, your extensive history with that. And I'm so glad that you brought up about, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the exact words that you used about coming together, and the simple ways that we can come together. We don't have to have fix the whole world agendas on a table between us, but we can have the simplicity of reaching out to be with one another at the level that we are. So we might not have much in the way of mindfulness practice between us. We might not have what is this pause thing that people keep talking about? We might not have any of these distinctions,
Mhm.
but we know in our heart of hearts that it would sure be a good idea if we spent a bit more time together and tried to walk this path together. So I appreciated the simplicity, and I know the deceptively simple simplicity that you just laid out, that suggestion of us uh, coming together in extraordinary times. I'm I'm feeling the envelope of our time together starting to close, and I'm wondering if there's any more you could share with us. I'm not even for a moment hearing you in the mode of giving advice. I am so delighted by your generous sharing of your own practices and your own experience, and it's so easy to hear, so potent and so easy to hear. I'm wondering if you could share anything more about the possibility of us coming together in a good way in neighborhoods, in families, in little organizations, in a time of such polarization and so much aggravation in our world. And I'm wondering if you could also include anything else you might like to say for people who are new to this conversation. They don't have nearly your experience, and they might be wondering, how do I start my bridge? Like Susan is describing, how do I start where I am and start to bridge to new possibilities or to new ways of relating
Mhm.
people? So anything you'd like to say in either of those areas, I'd sure appreciate it.
Sure. I mean, what comes to mind is, um, I've mentioned mindfulness, and certainly that was where my practice started. But over the years, my meditation changed dramatically. I mean, maybe it's not in essence a change, but my approach to it has changed. And it's something that I feel is significant in this time, because to really meet with another, to really meet in a group, there has to be the beginnings of some self-knowledge or some space. Otherwise, we're like this. We're just more of the same. And um, I think the difference in practice for me, whether it's a closed eyes sitting meditation or a walk in the woods or a few minutes before sleep or whatever it is, there's an approach of, rather than trying to see things and name them and be aware of, now I'm breathing and now I'm have an itch on my nose and now I'm irritated, and that it's more just, what would it be like for us to just let everything be the way it is? Can we cultivate a place inside where, we sit down and the experience of meditation is not about what experiences we have, but about just being still in the human experience of having a body, having a mind, having a heart, listening to sounds, smelling what's coming from the kitchen. That all of these things are, we're aware of them, we're mindful of them, but we don't pay any attention. We just let it all be. Because I find that the more deeply that has entered into my practice and my being, when I meet my sister who's a Republican, and we have to talk about how the kids are doing and what the weather is and how the Red Sox are doing and stuff, there's a part of me that still looks to her and says, let her be as she is. which doesn't mean we agree. And it doesn't mean that if things come up, we might not even have a good argument about it. But then we let that be. We don't make, we're living in a time and a culture where being somebody and proving ourselves and being recognized and being acknowledged and, you know, having so many likes on Facebook and whatever it is, there's so much in our culture that wants us to be somebody and stand out. And I just find myself more and more interested in what is it to just let myself be who I am, be nobody, be whatever it is, be with the fear, be with the excitement, be with the curiosity, be with the anger, not judging and making a meal out of every experience that I have in myself or with others. And then I feel like a deeper peace comes within. And in coming together with others, a deeper peace comes with others, which doesn't mean that we agree with everything. It doesn't mean we don't, you know, get really angry or really disturbed or have real arguments or, you know, all of that is part of the human experience. We're here playing this dance out, and there's so many forms, and we're so habituated to reacting left, right, and center to everything that happens within us and around us and in other people, that we're constantly on guard. And I feel like that constant needing to know what's going on keeps us from the space, that pause, that space that might just remember how much I love my sister, you know, and might allow us to come up with new ideas that none of us individually have ever come up with, because there's space and we're together in that space and we recognize there are differences, but we recognize we all fundamentally care. And uh, and when that space is there, whether it's internally or whether it's collectively between us, I mean, I feel like that's the only hope. That's the place where something new can be born for our world, for ourselves, for our togetherness. Yeah, I mean, part of me feels like it's airy-fairy to say all this stuff, but I think it's really true. You know, as I get older and older, I feel, you know, there's fundamentally some mystery going on that's bigger than any of us, that's bigger than this planet, that's bigger than our democracy. And let's do everything we can to do everything we can to make it as good as we can, and then it's kind of down to thy will be done in a way, you know. So that's how far I've gotten in my own in my own efforts to remain a sane, caring human being in these crazy, terrifying times. Yeah, and I think, you know, I think there's a lot of groups coming together for different purposes, whether it's to get a neighborhood to get energy audits, or whether it's people getting together to explore their grief and their sadness. But when people come together with some kind of common intent and focus on that common intent, I think so much more is possible than when we try to force something. I mean, Thanksgiving dinners where people are together because they have to be could be very difficult, you know. But when people come together because they remember that we're all in this together, then we can discover something new.
Beautiful. Susan Olshuff, it has just been an absolute pleasure to get to know you in this, our second chance to speak. I so appreciate you taking the time. I know that you have a very full life going on in the work that you do, and then the family care that you give, and I don't know what else, but I know it's a full plate. And I hope against hope that this is not our last time talking. It seems like there's this flow of this generous flow of your sharing your history, your experience, your wisdom. And I predict that that sharing will make a big difference for a lot of folks watching this series. So thank you so much for taking the time to share and to be with us. And I sure wish you and your extended family well.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor to be with you, and I appreciate how you pull out and give the space for me to hear things I haven't heard come out of me yet. So it's wonderful. And I look forward to an ongoing friendship. So thank you very much, Dean. And happy holidays to you and to all the listeners.
All righty.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.